I'm Aldrich. I'm with Elastic. My information's vaguely up there. And I want to talk about some of the lessons I learned about how humans as a complex system operate from the lessons I got from people. From computers. Specifically about MTBF and MTTR. So some quick things. What are we talking about? Mean time between failures versus mean time to resolution. Specifically optimizing for, instead of the time that we can spread out the failures, how vast that impact is in actual recovery. How quickly we can come back from that. We're also dealing with complex systems. So what do we mean here? The systems are always changing. They have a lot of component parts. They're probably not conceived of whole cloth. And the same input doesn't necessarily generate the same output. There's some emergent behavior that can happen in these types of systems. When we design things for reliability, a lot of times we're building very rigid structures. We're trying to predict how things are going to fail and how we can avoid that. But it can create some other problems. It's not necessarily what we want. What we want are systems that are resilient, things that can bounce back from failure, that can deal with unknown circumstances, something where we can have a new problem and still deal with that. And what happens when we build things that are avoiding failure and we keep trying to build towards that, we kind of build workarounds for our structured systems. Sometimes that can be a little bit kludgy, and sometimes that can lead to tech debt, things that we know we need to go back and fix the right way but never actually do. And this happens with people too. Turns out if you just keep pushing things down in your relationships, you can also build that debt. The nice thing about complex systems, they take a lot of things to break before they catastrophically fail. The terrible thing about tech debt is you can end up with cascade failure scenarios where one thing breaks and stresses another weak point and so on and so forth down the line, causing a lot of problems. Consequently, there is no one root cause to failure in complex systems and people. You should just know that. If you're doing root cause analysis on complex systems, you're not actually fixing problems. And the same is true of people. So how can we actually mend that? We need to live in blameless cultures. We need to be allowed to fail and not have the finger pointed at someone for being the cause of that failure. We need to actually be able to go through that process so that we can learn to improve, figure out where in the system things went wrong so we can work on that. Because experience with failure is necessary to avoid failure. If we don't actually know what we do that causes the failure, we don't know how to avoid it. Same thing with people. If I don't know what in a conversation might trigger a particular emotional response from that person, I don't really know how to avoid doing that. It's also how we operate at potential, right? If we know when to push the envelope forward and take those risks, when I know when to push you forward maybe out of your comfort zone, or when I need to create an environment of safety, we can't really live up to our potential. So that means we might have to have some hard conversations. And what better for having conversations than TCP, right? I want to make sure that what I'm saying to you is received in the correct order and with the correct intentions. Shouty conversations happen when both sides feel they're not being heard, so they get louder. So here's a technique. What you're saying is X, and what I'm hearing is Y, where X is verbatim what you have said, so that person understands that you heard the words they said. But Y is how you're actually interpreting that, what it's saying to you and how you're interpreting that message. That way you complete the handshake and are on the same side. At Elastic, we work distributed, so we build distributed systems, and we're in 30-some countries and speak 19 different languages and use a lot of Slack. So we're trying to do some amount of translation through text, which is hard. So we have to assume good intent. There was actually, a turn of phrase like "get the most bang for your buck" does not necessarily translate to someone who lives in Austria. They don't necessarily know what that means. So we have to assume people don't mean to offend each other offhand. But it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So we actually have a /Zoom command in our Slack. So if you're communicating and maybe not quite meshing, you can type /Zoom, immediately start a video chat, and avoid those abstractions. You get as close to personal conversation with someone as possible, and still remain thousands of miles apart. So this is another tool called non-violent communication. This is really good if you have a relationship that is hard to fix, but still want to. It breaks a conversation down into specific points and provides a very strict framework for it, so you can separate these concepts. Observations are things that have happened, like a microphone or a camera could pick it up. You aren't judging the feelings that are going on behind that. Your feelings aren't like, I feel abandoned, because that's a lot of interpretation, but like happy or sad or angry. Needs are very core human needs, and requests aren't demands. It's something, would you be willing to do this in the future? You have to leave room to say no. There's a lot more to that, and it's something that only works in environments that have safety and have trust. There are some other things you can do with that if you have very safe environments. I'd love to talk more in an open space about all of this, so How's that for transitions? Thank you.